Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries, with host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Denny Weinberg. Jesus told us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we'll examine what's happening in our world and how it points to the end and his soon return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, session 2 with our good friend Eric, who's right now in Jerusalem from Israel. Last session, which if you haven't listened to it, really go back and listen. We brought an update on the war with Iran, Israel, and the United States. There's a 60-day MOU that ceasefire. We've stated that they've got to dismantle their nuclear weapons and open the Straits of Hormuz. We spent last session talk about unlikely that they're ever going to agree to either one of those things. And then 2, the goal will be to keep delaying by having another 2-month delay, push it past the midterm to see what the political scenario is here, particularly at prices of oil. They come down some, but not really help the U.S. Consumer. And then last time we talked a little bit about the impact of really what's going on here is the whole Arab state. So Denny, if you would ask that question again, then we'd love to hear what Eric would have to say about that.
Yeah, from the standpoint of public opinion in the United States, it would appear that these other Gulf states, have moved from viewing Iran as a huge long-term risk, and therefore being somewhat, maybe privately, behind Trump's attempt to disable their capabilities. They've moved from that position to one that says, no, we're going to just pay them off or acquiesce to an Iran that we're going to have to deal with. Is that what has changed? Was the perspective wrong, or have the point of view of these other countries changed a lot?
The perception of the United States winning or losing the war is what changed it. And by agreeing to the terms that the United States agreed to under the advanced negotiations are being seen in the Middle East as the United States showing unbelievable weakness. And so when your ally is weak, what do? If you're an Arab country in the Gulf and you make an accommodation with your adversary, which is what everybody's doing now. And all the discussions about expanding the Abraham Accords, Trump so misunderstands, in my opinion, the dynamics. When he had there was that big, I don't know, maybe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, where he had this call with Qatar and Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf countries about what was going on with the discussions with Iran. And he was briefing them. And then at the end of the conversation, he says, and I expect all of you to join the Abraham Accords when this is done. And there was silence for 5 minutes. There's not, for sure, there's not going to be an expansion for a long time of the Abraham Accords. And I'm hoping the Emirates stay in. I'm not sure they will, because they're going to go, Iran wants the Emirates to be back in its camp, and that's why it attacked it more than any other country. And sure enough, the Emir of the Emirates met with the leader of the IRGC, and I don't know what they discussed, but I'm guessing how much money the Emirates can pay them to get them to stop attacking. Because the United States isn't showing the determination. Now, I think the United States can argue that these Gulf countries weren't being helpful or cooperative, which is also true. I mean, here the United States has bases. It spends a lot of money maintaining these bases in these Gulf countries. And it's not to help Israel, I guarantee you. Okay, those bases don't. Yeah, maybe they fired a few missile interceptors, back in June of 2025 and back in April of 2025 when Iran fired all those missiles against Israel. Yeah, maybe there were interceptors fired from some of those bases. But those bases were established in the aftermath, of the first Iraq War. Okay, when if your listeners may remember, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and then President George Bush Sr. launched the first Iraq War, and then after that, they built these bases throughout these Gulf countries in the Middle East, and nominally to protect them, so that wouldn't happen again. So, if these countries aren't going to let the United States use those bases to protect them, the Gulf countries, what are these bases for? And why is the United States selling arms to these countries that that aren't interested in using them to defend themselves? Someone's got to ask that question, because I don't understand it. And some of the United States better figure out the answer.
Eric, is the assumption that this is all, that the timing of this and this MOU being introduced and the timelines for the MOU and all of that, that ultimately there is a place, is the assumption that there's a place Trump is trying to get to that's more related to the November elections than anything else? Or do they say, no, here's what's happened. Trump used to be smart. Now he's dumb. How did they conclude Trump is thinking?
Look, you just sort of see what's going on. You see how these negotiations transpire. And look, maybe in December, things change. I don't know. I'm certainly not going to bet that they do, because I don't see what's going to be different in November. Now, as I explained, I explained what I thought was going to be different.
The election will be over in the United States.
Yeah, but I think the election is now, because of this capitulation on this memorandum of understanding, I think it's going to hurt Trump more than it would have otherwise. Because from what I've read and heard, many Republicans are up in arms and furious about, what they see as a surrender. Okay, rightfully so. So, and the Gulf countries, they look out for their own interests. Okay, and they have a very cushy economy. The Emirates are being led by a very wise leader for the time being, and they've managed to transition their economy largely off of oil. They make money off of oil, obviously, but they also make money off of a lot of other things. It's become a tourist, not during the war, obviously, but it's a tourist destination for many people in the South Asia and the Middle East. I wouldn't be surprised if 2 years from now, Disney doesn't announce a Disneyland to go in there, okay? Like they have in Tokyo and Paris. So, but Saudi Arabia has done a terrible job transitioning itself off of oil. It's got all these big mega projects that have all failed.
Yeah.
All of them. And they've squandered time and a lot of money. Okay. And it depends, and then you've got little countries like Bahrain and Qatar. Qatar just makes so much money and has like 200,000 citizens living in Qatar, and they belong to two different tribes. So it's very cohesive society. And they're very big supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they bought, lock, stock, and barrel every Ivy League in the United States. They pump so much money in that they can determine. Northwestern University has to pass certain decisions by the government of Qatar before they can implement certain curricula at their campus in Qatar. It's going to expose just how much money Qatar has flushed into the United States economy and bought politicians and universities, schools and K-12 schools. It's unbelievable. And all these nonprofits across the country are all front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood, all paid for by Qatar. Then you have countries like Kuwait and Bahrain that generate a lot of revenue off of oil, but are very, very tiny. Okay, Iraq is a polyglot of tribes of Sunni and Shia, and they're busy now building a rail. They're actually shipping oil by truck across the land from their oil fields inside Iraq all the way through Syria to the coastline, either into Turkey or the coastline where Syria has in the Mediterranean. And they're right now they're building a railroad, and they want to build a pipeline. So there's going to be a lot of activity building pipelines throughout this Middle East, going various directions to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, which is very good and healthy for everybody.
In the next 6 to 12 months, how do you see the Arab nations lining up including Iran? We know that there is a division between Sunni and Shiite, but are they going to come to the Arab nations I'm talking about, come to a kind of a reshuffling of the relationships between Iran and these other big countries like Saudi Arabia, et cetera, and it'll have a new paradigm of the Middle East Arab countries. Do you see that? Where do you see that going?
I see them all trying to make an accommodation with Iran, paying them off to buy time. Saudi Arabia is paranoid. Imagine for a second, okay? Let's say Iran were being run by a normal government that generates oil and gas revenue, pumps it into its economy, has a population of people. I mean, I'm sure Dennis sees it in LA. The Iranians as a people are very entrepreneurial, very business oriented. They very commercial. And they're very innovative. They create things. When you look at what they've managed to create missile-wise on their own indigenously, it's amazing. What they're capable of doing. So imagine you've got a population of 90 million people, oil and gas revenue coming in, and a very entrepreneurial people. If you're Saudi Arabia, you're paranoid. If they have a normal country, the best thing that can happen to Saudi Arabia is that the sanctions in Iran go back and they're crippled and they can't gain a normal economy. The best thing that can happen for the world and for Israel and for India and for the United States is that Iran becomes a normal country.
Right.
Because everybody can trade with it and people can buy things and sell things and everybody is, there's no war going on. But that's the antithesis of what Saudi Arabia wants, okay? Because it wants to be the hegemon in the area. It's all topsy-turvy, and you kind of need to understand how all these different countries are looking at things. And Saudi Arabia, in my opinion, is the most hypocritical of them all, okay? So if you're encouraging the United States to go to war, the United States goes to war, and then you chicken out after 6 weeks, yet you're still an ally. I don't understand how the United States would use these things. I don't understand how Trump uses
How about the nuclear issue? Because this was a threat to everyone in the region. None of them would support, they're not going to pay off Iran to allow them to be the only one with nuclear capabilities, are they?
Let me explain. You're the ruler of Iran, okay? And if you want to renew your nuclear capability, even if you get permission from the world, it's going to cost you hundreds of billions of dollars to recover it, okay? You have to rebuild the centrifuges, all this other stuff, right? When instead, all you got to do is build a couple 100,000 drones and 20,000, 10,000 cruise missiles, and you can close the Strait of Hormuz. And because President Trump already announced to the world that closing the Strait of Hormuz was crippling the world economy, and it was going to be a crash in the economy. So now I'm the ruler of Iran. I said, wow, that means if I can take over the Strait of Hormuz next year, after the American aircraft carriers are gone, I can bring the world to its knees and demand money from it. Who needs a nuclear bomb? No one, they don't need a nuclear bomb. They can just bring the world, because the United States has permitted them to close the Strait of Hormuz. In 1988 and 1989, there was also a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The United States sent in the Navy and the military and opened it up. It cost them one sunken ship, and I don't know how many men were killed in that ship that got sunk, but because it hit a mine. But it took them a year and a half to 2 years to eventually open the Strait of Hormuz, and they did. Now things are different now, and so on and so forth. But and of course, if the neighbors like Saudi Arabia are blocking the United States from using those bases, it makes it much harder for the United States. So. Everything points to Iran emerging from this much stronger, much stronger, because they will not only have the Strait of Hormuz, they can build 20,000 missiles. And if they can build 20,000 missiles, and now Europe's all of a sudden afraid. All of a sudden, President of France, Emmanuel Macron, is talking about we have to restrict the missiles of Iran. All of a sudden, he wants to raise it at the UN. Why? Because now they've shown that they have the range. Their missiles can hit Europe. Now Europe is afraid. In a year and a half from now, guess what? They'll have ICBMs, and they'll be able to hit the United States with missiles.
But Eric,
now the United States has a lot of defensive capabilities.
Eric, how about the argument that hyperinflation is occurring in Iran, and that this idea that they're stronger than they were, not only having lost all of their military capabilities, but they're now dealing with reportedly, over 100%, 200%, 300% inflation.
They don't care. This is a death cult that does not care what their population suffers through, okay? This is not a government that has any responsibility to its people. It has a responsibility to its theology, okay? So they will have their people suffer. They don't care. They were talking about moving everybody out of Tehran because there was no water. And the city was sinking because the underground aquifers were being depleted. This is not a country that cares about its people. So who cares about it? If it's 1,000% inflation, the population will deal with it. As long as we can build our arms, as long as we can block the Strait of Hormuz, we can fulfill our destiny. We don't care. That's the.
So if the Saudi,
they're not a normal country.
If the Arab countries say, okay, we're gonna negotiate above or below the table with, they need money, we'll give them money in exchange for not attacking us and settling it down in their Arab viewpoint, what will be the Arab point of view on Iran developing a nuclear weapon, which they still, I believe, want to and are committed to. And it doesn't even matter to me whether they agree not to at some point. They'll just keep doing it anyway. So, but what will be the Arab position on they're trying to prevent that, which is a threat, still a threat to them too?
I think they'll all be asking for nuclear, capability from the United States. If they don't get it from the United States, they'll go ask somebody else. Pakistan has nuclear capabilities, and there's a defense, and because Saudi Arabia is sensing weakness in the United States, it's busy trying to put together a defense alliance between itself, Turkey, India, and not India, sorry, Pakistan and Egypt. Why? Well, Turkey has the infrastructure. Turkey's building its own 5th generation fighter jet, okay, that they think is going to be better than the F-35. They just are looking for partners who can complete the development with them. Whether it's better or not, I don't know. I'm not qualified. But they have a very sophisticated arms industry that Saudi Arabia can tap into. And guess what Pakistan has? They have nukes. They have the nuclear bomb and the missiles to deliver them. So Saudi Arabia does a deal. Saudi Arabia already signed a mutual defense treaty with Pakistan.
Yeah.
Will
the Arab countries attempt to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon?
They can't prevent Iran from stopping their ships in the Gulf. They can't. They're incapable of doing anything, these countries. And by the way, your listeners should know that, everyone hears about Hezbollah and they're the biggest proxy of Iran. It wasn't always that way. Years ago, they had a bigger Shiite proxy in Bahrain, and it was bringing the government down. And that's why the Houthis were fighting against the Saudis. Once the Houthis, stopped, thinking they could go to war with Saudi Arabia again. It was the United States that stopped it. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates killed over 200,000 people. You don't hear about this in Yemen during that war. 200,000 people.
Okay,
so here's a genocide.
So
you
say
genocide. I don't know the genocide.
So what you're saying is that they're going to try to realign in some way. Whatever they decide, they're not going to be able to stop Iran from building a nuclear weapon. The United States, will make noise, but probably won't either. So that leaves Israel. Talk a little bit about what will then Israel do as they go back to building, try to build a nuclear weapon, one, and maybe start with Hezbollah that is still on the north that is causing.
Let's talk about Lebanon, Hezbollah.
Causing you trouble, and then we'll go back to what will they do as Iran starts to build a nuclear weapon again, since really there's nobody left to try to, prevent that.
Of everything that was in this 14-point deal negotiated by Vice President Vance, the very worst thing that he did was to allow Iran to link Lebanon and Hezbollah to the deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Iran thinks that Israel is a proxy of the United States. They don't see it as a sovereign country. And that's how they view things. Okay. So they wanted to put, so now what's the consequence of Vice President Vance's decision? It's multifold. First of all, if Israel fires a rifle across the border against Hezbollah in Iraq, in Lebanon, Iran can now say we're going to close the Strait of Hormuz and blame it on Israel. Because that's what they're doing. And that's what Vice President Vance enabled them to do. And I believe it's because Vice President Vance is in the camp with Tucker Carlson. They're friends, and Tucker Carlson all of a sudden decided in the last 2 years that he hates Israel. I can guess why, but I don't want to say publicly what I think because I don't want to be sued, okay? Because I don't have proof. But this is an abominable part of the agreement that makes us in Israel absolutely livid. I mean, President Trump's popularity dropped within 2 weeks from 80% of the population of Israel to 15%. President Trump was going to come to Israel to help, Netanyahu in his election. I don't know. I guess we're like a congressional district in the United States. I don't know. But he's a persona non grata here now. President Trump is. I mean, so Vice President Vance tells Netanyahu and the Israelis, no one's done more for you than, President Trump. And there's truth to what he says. But what he's just agreed to in this agreement is unbelievably terrible. Unbelievably terrible. So right now we have Israeli troops sitting exposed in Lebanon. Vance agreed that they'd be evacuated. How can you, as the United States, negotiate terms for Israel without even consult? Israel has never consulted once about this agreement or solicited its opinion or allowed to contribute to those negotiations in any way whatsoever. And here you have people in Switzerland, Iran, Pakistan, and Qatar and the United States negotiating over what happens in Lebanon when Marco Rubio is sitting in Washington, D.C., inviting Israel and Lebanon to talk directly. I mean, this is a circus. It's a three-ring circus, and it's ridiculous. You cannot negotiate a deal with the Iranians over what happens between Israel and Hezbollah or Israel and Lebanon. Iran doesn't own Lebanon like it thinks it does. Lebanon doesn't view it that way. But guess what's happened now? There were talks in Washington 2 days ago, hosted by Marco Rubio, and all of a sudden Lebanese are saying, well, we can't make any decisions anymore without Iran's involvement. So they've subjugated themselves now to Iran. along with all the rest of the Middle East. Iran has emerged from this thing probably more powerful than the United States in the eyes of the Arab world. That's how they see it.
So as Hezbollah, let's say, continues to attack Israel or push Israel back, what will Israel do?
It's exactly what happened. Both Mossad, and it came out in the paper 3 days ago, as well as the intelligence operations of the Arab states, all told President Trump that everything that they're seeing, Hezbollah is being told by Iran to fire against the Israelis, knowing the Israelis will fire back and give Iran the excuse to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
And this is what's going to be going on for the next 6 months. And this is what Vice President Vance has set up. Now he's going to go on public TV soon and blame Israel for this whole thing. Israel will now pull out of Lebanon, and they're destroying the whole memorandum of understanding and the opportunity to get the nukes out of Iran. And they don't understand what they're doing. But I guarantee you it's not Israel that's one party that doesn't understand what they're doing. We have a vice president who has no clue.
Despite that, will Israel go ahead and fight back as they have in the past?
Against Hezbollah, what we're doing now is we're within the areas under our control. We're removing and destroying all the infrastructure. They found a missile city the size of the missile cities they had in Iran built in the mountains of Lebanon under rock. So they needed special equipment to drill in the rock. And now Israel is not even sure they can blow it up. They fill with concrete. I don't know what there's no final decision what they're going to do, but they're going to be basically cleaning out what all the areas in the area of their current control. For sure, there's not going to be any bombing against Hezbollah positions in Beirut for the time being, and they'll probably hold back on bombing any of the other positions of Hezbollah for some time. And if they get attacked, these drones that they've come up with, these fiber optic cables, are very problematic. Israel hasn't come up with a solution for it yet, and I can't even think of one, but they're looking for solutions to that. But every week there's a soldier being killed, one or two. This is what's happening now with Israeli soldiers. And in Hezbollah, they don't care, but in Israel, we care a lot. Something else your listeners should know. Israel is so effective in killing off all the commanders of Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah is now like 25% of what it was prior to October 2023. It's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. These are Iranians inside of Lebanon commanding Hezbollah. You have a foreign nation with military commanders uninvited by Lebanon commanding the biggest militia in his country. And Lebanon has no control. And the United States agreed to it. They agreed to all this stuff.
So will Israel protect itself regardless of that? Will Israel protect itself and keep?
Yes, Israel for sure against Hezbollah. And when Israel believes it has the ability to go in and hit the ballistic missiles production, they'll do it again. Okay, they'll go on for some time, and then Iran will attack and whatever, and then they'll close the Strait of Hormuz, and it'll be Israel's fault again.
Yeah.
So because Vice President Vance enabled this linkage, it's going to be linked to everything. And now you'll see, Iran's going to now link the Bab el-Mandab Strait as well. That if Israel does this and this, they're going to close the straits in the Red Sea, and therefore the Suez Canal. And then what you're going to see, and you mark my words, this is going to happen within the next 5 to 10 years. Turkey, as you know, the Bosphorus Straits that go from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean crosses through Turkish territory. And Turkey agreed to, I think 100 years ago, to make that open navigation waters, no tolls, nothing. They don't control, they don't police it, they don't inspect what goes through it. And it's very narrow. Well, guess what? You'll see, Turkey's going to start charging money. And there was Indonesia already proposed to charge money in the Straits of Malacca, which is between it and Singapore. And both Singapore and Malaysia said no. And so far, Indonesia's not doing it. All over the world, this is going to happen now. Everyone's going to close their waterways to international traffic and start charging money. That's what's going to happen.
Well, we're at the end of our time. Denny, as you and I reflect on this, our topic every Friday is called End Times Friday. We know from the biblical description is that the world comes against Israel, and we know that Iran isn't able to destroy Israel with a nuclear bomb because they still exist at the end. So quite frankly, what you've described, Eric, to me shows really in short order the shift that is taking place where United States and Israel now have separate objectives, and the world is going to come against Israel. But Israel is going to protect itself anyway, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So we'll come back to that. We'll have some of the things you're talking about. We'll come back, here in another 2 or 3 weeks and talk about, okay, what happened? But what you're saying, I think what you're saying is where it's going to go. Is it's going to get delayed? Nothing's going to really occur. I don't believe the United States is going to go back and attack Iran. The Arab nations are reshuffling, and Israel's kind of stuck with this awful scenario where they're going to be blamed for protecting themselves. They're going to get blamed for the big impact of it. And Dan, do you have any other summary thoughts about that?
Well, in the back of my mind is this massive naval armada sitting in the region. And time does allow, as Eric said last week, resupply of all kinds of things. And we know there's a lot of work right now to try and stimulate manufacturing of weapons and other things to build capabilities back up. So I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking of, really about how this midterm election is affecting the thinking of lots of people politically, and that there's a whole agenda that's sitting on top of this that none of us are aware of. I've felt this for a long time. Whether or not that means there is a plan underway, or whether this is the United States has put itself in an impossible position, I'm still not sure I know which side to go with that.
Yeah.
But I'm most moved by the things that Eric said about the sudden shift in all the other countries in the Middle East that may be hard to undo. But maybe as time plays out, there'll be some clarity on that. But I think there's a lot going on in parallel. And I think this election season probably is playing a big role.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight and what you see over there. Thanks for sharing that. We'll watch it very closely. And I think the conclusion is that there's no easy path, and there's no, definite, let's say, putting Iran in a place where they're going to stop their theological objective, which is to eliminate Israel and actually all infidels against their basic beliefs. So if you have questions, send them in at questions@abideministry.com. And we'd love to hear from them. And we'll look forward to catching up with Eric and Rabbi here in another few weeks, and keep this discussion going. Very, very dynamic, and it's very interesting. So, Eric, thank you so much. See you guys.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.